Hi, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining. Welcome back to my channel. Excited to have you here. I have Stefan Rust joining us. He was the CEO of Bitcoin.com. I didn't know Bitcoin had a CEO, so he'll be joining us this morning, talking to us about tech, talking to us about Bitcoin, talking to us about his experience. He's based in Hong Kong, and I think his insights will be useful to you today. A bit later, I have David Tait coming on. He's the CEO of Mandarin Matrix. I think he's reinventing how education works, how language learning works. He'll come on and tell us a little bit about how he's doing that. He has a huge base of 50,000 students already using his service, looks to take on the world and offer Mandarin to the world. Look forward to sharing his insights, his story with us a little bit later. So just before Stefan comes on and says hello and introduces himself to you and what he's been up to, I just want to remind you that the Good Luck Club podcast went live this morning. We have a new broadcast with Bernard Moon. He is Spark Labs co-founder. They're one of the most active early stage angel investors. He's based out in Silicon Valley, but invests all over the world. He has a big influence on the early stage investment scene. His insights as to what investors are looking for right now and how they make investment decisions, I think will be really useful to you guys. So please try to check out that podcast. Tomorrow we'll be releasing a new tips video. We have the 18 tips for getting great sales. Sales is always a word I think that's totally underrated and sometimes misunderstood. I think sales is such an important part of building a business, and I wanted to get down on paper what I thought was the process for sales, and that insight might surprise you and how sales actually works. So that'll be live tomorrow, so look out for that. So yeah, Stefan's here, so I'll bring him on, folks, and we can say hello. Hi, Stefan, how you doing?
Hey, Simon, long time.
It's been too long, yeah. Time flies, doesn't it?
Amazing. When you're having a great time, it flies even faster, right? And
so true.
As an entrepreneur, you've always got things to do. There's never a quiet moment. And in technology as well, it's evolving so fast. There's so much being built, and we're sort of hitting that exponential growth. So it's so much fun. You're always learning. And and I think you just get distracted so easily as well.
True. Great time to be alive, right? I mean, it's just, I know it also has its hardships with COVID, but somehow I saw someone say the other day that, one day we'll be saying, we went through the COVID experience, So as long as we can survive as a race, then hopefully we can look back at it with a positive spin. But I wanted to start off, if you don't mind, by maybe introducing my audience to you. Now, I know you well, I have a lot of respect for you, but I wondered if you wouldn't mind just showing my audience a little bit about your history and what you're all about.
So yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Simon, and thanks everybody for your time to watching this and hearing about my life story and how I actually came across to meet Simon in Hong Kong. I'm based in Hong Kong. I studied in Switzerland. I then was very lucky and fortunate to land in China and got involved in this industry called mobile, right? And I built out one of the first mobile networks in China together with China Unicom in 4 different cities. We set it up as a startup and sold that to China Unicom back in 2000 when they wanted to go IPO, just at the time of this whole .com boom. And I ran across Sun Microsystems and a guy called Jonathan Schwartz, who was running corporate development at Sun Microsystems. And they wanted to focus on bringing Java onto the mobile phone. And so I got into having mobile experience, helping find out how to build a virtual machine and get that embedded in a lot of the handsets with the operators, and spent about 7 years really building out the relationships with handset manufacturers, operators, but also the .com startups that at the time, at the .com bust, were looking to get onto mobile phones as a new revenue stream. 2007 left, came back to Hong Kong really, and sort of set up Exicon, which was a developer agency working to grow the community of developers. I'm a big believer in developer-led innovation, as I called it at the time, and really built relationships with developers and tried to promote software developer kits, APIs, and other tools or emerging technologies to those developers and trying to get a feel which ones are the right ones. And through that work, I came across this technology called Bitcoin in about 2000, and I think it was about 2012. And yeah, one guy in Guatemala asked to be paid in Bitcoin. I said, what the hell is that? And so I looked it up, and then I got into that, and it was about $5 at the time, using eBay and PayPal to sort of get my Bitcoins, paid a lot of the developers in Bitcoins, and yeah, just sort of got hooked to that. But it wasn't until about 2018 where I met Roger Ver, founder of Bitcoin.com, when he asked me to be the CEO and take on, we both had the same vision of what Bitcoin stands for and how to do that. And so I spent pretty much the last 15 months growing the customer base from 2 million to about 12 million. We launched an exchange, we launched a credit card service, we launched a token generation engine, and a whole bunch of other features. And so the last sort of 3-4 months, I've been focused on my new thing, which I'll tell you about a bit later.
Wow, what an amazing history you've got. It's what does Bitcoin stand for? I'm fascinated. That's a really interesting subject. The whole what people perceive as Bitcoin, but what does it stand for in your mind?
It's peer-to-peer cash, right? So it's cash for a digital economy. The way I look at it, we have two different economies. We have economy that we know today, the physical economy, and then we have what we call a digital economy. And in that digital economy, goods and services are traded in Bitcoin and Bitcoin-like tokens or currencies. Bitcoin is a technology, and then there's the Bitcoin, the money as we know it. And then there's Ethereum. And to me, Bitcoin resembles gold. Ethereum is another Bitcoin, which to me resembles sort of the fees that you need to pay to use the Ethereum computer, right? Which is sort of an Amazon Web Services equivalent in a decentralized world. And then there are other, Bitcoin Cash is very much focused on the retail market, so spending it at shops and physical outlets, online, I think, and that's really where we focus the Bitcoin Cash community. And then there are other tokens out there that have other services for video services and decentralized storage, etc. So it's fascinating.
What about ICO? ICO seems to be all the rage. It seems to have gone quiet, but what's your view on that?
I mean, the ICO was every industry goes through boom times, and I think ICO, you had a lot of people coming into Bitcoin and crypto and seeing this market rocket up and fear of missing out, right? So they were suffering FOMO on the way up. And as a result, you had a lot of scamsters. And I don't know, you remember the .com days? You had a lot of companies coming up with just adding the .com to the end of their business, and then they'd go and try and do an IPO. And I think it was similar in the ICO days, where you had a lot of people, they'd write a beautiful white paper and no execution skills, no operational skills. And just because it was blockchain and Bitcoin written on it, a lot of people that didn't have an understanding of what it took and was needed to build solutions like that, invested in that. On the flip side, and you had some $40 billion that were invested in companies that were going to build technologies. You look today, though, out of that period, you have companies like Tezos, Algorand, and a number of others that have really emerged. The other one is Polkadot. It's companies that have just come out with that fund to really build innovative new blockchains. And that period and that funding has really allowed a lot of building. And I think a lot of people tend to forget how much it takes to build software. As you know, from your background, it's not overnight. You don't build something and it works beautifully the next day. To build something scalable, decentralized, around the globe with multiple participants, regardless of border, race, culture, language, it's a phenomenal exercise to do that and have the right product managers, the good software developers to do code testing with people's money. Is not an easy task, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that come to life just now, and we'll see much more innovation out of this, out of that ICO period.
I just want to tell a quick personal story. I actually met you the first time 18, 19 years ago. I was my first Christmas in Hong Kong, and your brother so kindly invited me to your family home for Christmas because I had nowhere to go that Christmas. And so I got the pleasure of meeting you and your family. And I was a stranger really. You opened up your home, and it was so wonderful, such a wonderful thing. And then I learned about, frankly, what an amazing entrepreneurial family you are. But as long as I've known you, you have been like pushing this boundary of tech. And I always think you should add futurist to your resume. Like I've heard you so many times, quite right, you talk about these things happening, but everyone's such a naysayer. After the 2000 crash, I remember having a discussion with you. Everyone's like, well, .com's over. No one cares about the internet anymore. What's your view on the future now? What's the next thing coming down the pipe that no one believes, for example?
Yeah, I mean, funny that my wife says the same thing. I should call myself futurist, right? Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased, right? But I do believe in cryptocurrencies. I do believe in the blockchain as a means to change the business models that we are currently experiencing. If you look at history, you see the emergence of, we started off with communications using mobile phones. We were paying operators a lot of money to do a phone call or receive a phone call. Then IP came along. What did IP do? It brought down the cost of having communications to a flat subscription fee to my ISP. The next evolution of that is the services said, hey, don't pay us anything. Pay us with your data. Don't pay us cash, sorry. Pay us with your data, and we'll build all these funky services where you can communicate without any charges with everybody, and you can see all the news and you can get all of that. And I think we're beginning to experience the backlash, if we haven't already experienced the backlash of that. And so now comes this new model where all of a sudden people are beginning to realize that you are the customer, you are providing a great value to me by using my service, and that value is allowing me to enhance the service. So I'm going to be paying you for the data that you are providing me in order to optimize my service better for the greater community. So the user becomes the customer and the investor at the same time.
Because right now, that the whole thing with social networking anyway is that if it's free, then you're the product, right?
Yeah.
So, your data is the product, but it does feel like that people are wising up to that. And that data is slowly becoming more protected and therefore more valuable, right?
Yeah. I mean, you also see, the customer acquisition costs some of these companies are paying. Once you've hit a certain benchmark, to acquire new customers, you're paying a lot of money. And where's that money going? Why don't I just pay it to the customers to get them to use my service? And if you look at, and it's not a new model. PayPal did that when they were looking to grow their business. They paid customers $10 for any referrals, etc. And so, yeah, there is always a fee somewhere in there, right? If it's with your data, with your personal information, or something like that. And yeah, so we're seeing that back.
It's always crazy to me to see the Uber model where they would actually be basically paying the drivers and they wouldn't be making any money, basically. They would actually be paying the driver extra to get them to use their service to be the vehicle that picks someone up. And then the customer acquisition costs just become insane, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, you look at, a lot of people complain about that, and who funded that? I mean, in the end, the VCs funded that, and the VCs get their money from the pension funds or the endowments, who get their money from the taxpayers or the pension submitters, right? And so it's sort of a virtuous cycle. But on the flip side,
I think people don't know where the money comes from. I mean, there was a whole thing in England recently about that all these people were accidentally investing in tobacco companies via their pensions, right? So if you're kind of anti-tobacco, and most of the money comes from those companies, right? So it's kind of fascinating. But if you're advising people to start a business today, and there's a lot of people coming out now of university, for example, that can't get a job. So my thing is, don't get a job, start a business of your own. So we're supposed to be, case studies of why that's a good idea. I don't know if we are, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. What would you think people should get into? Do you think the Bitcoin boat has sailed, or there's a lot of blockchain stuff to be done?
No, I mean, there's lots of blockchain stuff to be done. I totally agree with you, and I love your mission. What's your mission? Is to get 1 billion entrepreneurs, or create 1 billion entrepreneurs, or 1 million, or 100 million?
We're going to start with 1 million. We want to get 1 million people to start a business of their own, and once we're 1 million, then we'll just jump to 1 billion. You know,
Might as well, right?
One small step at a time. But yeah, it's definitely a time for entrepreneurs. I think it's definitely a soft skill that AI is going to find quite hard to replicate as well. And it's so easy to start a business now, isn't it? But I think people are actually a bit short on, I guess, direction. I think there's plenty of ideas out there, but you know, given all your experience, what do you think is the right way to go if you're advising young people?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe blockchain and Bitcoin technologies or cryptocurrencies is a way to go. I think if you look at just the financial services sector alone, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And at the moment, if you look at the market cap of combined the top 2,000 cryptocurrencies, you're looking at maybe 350 billion, right? So even gold alone is at, I think, at $9 trillion, right? And gold is just this heavy lugging, piece of stone that you have to carry around that looks nice and gold and yellow. But yeah, and so I think there's a lot more value to be achieved. And that's not even taking into account the capabilities and the functionalities that blockchain has overall. Combined with cryptocurrencies, you then have the ability to commercialize assets that historically have never been commercialized. And you can bring the cost down of tracking the origination of that and any sort of change on that original piece of data or information or product throughout the whole blockchain over the life cycle of that specific product, data set, or whatever it might be. And so huge opportunities. I personally believe that combined with that technology, mobile, bringing that user experience to a mobile phone is another opportunity. We haven't seen all the services yet come to the mobile phone. How do we make that so easy, so intimate, providing the user experience associated with that I can interact with whatever service I need to from my mobile phone in a user-friendly format. So those are the two things that I think are really big. Other than, you got AI, you got, sort of robotics, you got a number of big DNA sequencing, I think is another big area that we're going to go to and see significant growth.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's all both exciting and kind of scary. I'm watching Humans on Netflix at the moment, and you see where it can go, where the machines end up, we work for them, really. Which is quite scary. And once they have our DNA, it's kind of an interesting time. Yeah. But do you? You've always, as long as I've known you, as I said earlier, been involved in tech. Does it come naturally? Did it just one of those things? What did you first do when you first went into the working world?
I started off. I was a bit entrepreneurial. I started off doing T-shirt resale. I was born in Hong Kong, as you know, and I went to Switzerland in school, and I just realized that T-shirts in Switzerland cost so much money, right? And so, coming from Hong Kong, in those days, Hong Kong was a big manufacturing hub. I could buy lots of T-shirts and polo shirts, and some of them wouldn't quite have the right crocodile on it. It would be the other way around, or upside down, or it would have a banana on it instead of a crocodile. And so, and I funded that's how I got into sort of my entrepreneurial side and funded a lot of my vacations during my school days. My first job then, I didn't want to, I did some internships at big banks or in Switzerland, computer companies. If I'm starting out, I think as youth, when you're at school during your holidays, the more experience you can have working in a bar, on a construction site, in a factory, on a conveyor belt, if you still have the opportunity to do that, at an airport, at luggage handling. Those are all jobs I did during my time at university and at college. And I think that just opened experience with meeting people, understanding people, and seeing what their sentiments are at a ground level. And that experience to me, I think, was super invaluable.
I completely agree with that. I also had a similar experience, and just it doesn't matter what it is. It's just getting that kind of hands-on real life experience, like you say, talking to people, understanding what's going on in the real world. The more exposure you can have, and that's why I often say to people, you don't have to have a brilliant idea, just execute something. Like I'm sure you're the same. My own business, Fluid, wasn't particularly brilliant concept, but I think it was well executed. That was it. And so I had plenty of competition. And so it's an interesting time for young people, because I think now there's so many aspirational companies out there, Google, Facebook, and so on. People will want to do that or nothing.
Yeah. And I think you did it really well. I mean, you said just at the beginning of the show, as I was waiting in the I think the back room, and it was sales, right? I think because you did all the different jobs that you had, you managed to connect with people. You knew what was needed, how to listen to the different sentiments and to understand the different people that you had out there. And through that, you then managed to then connect with other people. And what people want to do business with people they like, right? I mean, that's really what it's about. And I think maybe in a digital world, it's slightly different. But in the age that we grew up in, that was super important. And I think that has now shifted into being able to still understand the people, but I need to understand how they're going to interact with my website. What buttons are they going to click? Where are they going to be looking? What is an emotional way to represent this word so I get them interacting? How do I get them to load an app off an app store with 2 million other apps on there? Things like that, right? And so I think it's just a different angle on trying to relate to your customers and understand what they'll be looking for from the product you're trying to promote or get them to see the utility value of.
You mentioned some really good points there, and I think one of the things that's interesting to explore is people doing business with people. I think that's true even in the tech business. I think it takes a bit more time maybe, but for example, I know a lot of people that are boycotting Facebook because they don't trust Mark Zuckerberg. It's that personal. And so I think as platforms scale, there is, maybe the tobacco companies, they never put the CEO forward. They keep it all quiet. They don't want any personality, and they've got an addiction nature to them, a bit like social media. So there is, there's two things: there's the nature and nurture, right? There's the natural instinct to be addicted to something like Facebook, but then when you find out what they're doing with the data and how they're not stopping political ads, and how Mark Zuckerberg might speak on Capitol Hill about how they can do whatever they want with the data, people have signed in, it's their fault. It does start to resonate with people that it's a person behind every business, right? Even in this day.
And I think there's so much to say. I mean, one thing I do as an entrepreneur and having gone through startups, it's not easy, right? I mean, you have tough days, you have hard days, you don't know if you can make payroll, you won't make payroll, you have to convince the staff to stay on until that paycheck comes through from that customer that you close a sale with. There's always a curveball. You got a great customer, you close the deal, and then all of a sudden they have an reorganization. All these things happen all the time. And going through that hardship, I think there is, in the case of a Mark Zuckerberg, he went through hardship. I think different types of hardships. He was very lucky.
I think he's got a hard life now, if you ask me. I wouldn't want his life.
Yeah, exactly. That visibility, right?
I watched a video of him going running. He had 7 bodyguards around him just so he could go running. I mean, that's not freedom. I mean, for me, entrepreneurship, the key word is freedom. Right? Yeah. Freedom to do what you want. I think when what you've built ends up owning you, could be quite scary, right? Yeah. Quite scary. But, so I mean, you intrigued us. What's next? I'm going to take the Bitcoin.com thing off. Tell us what's next.
So I've launched Sonic Capital. We're setting that up, and I'm working with Alyssa Aaron, by the way, who I'm sure you know as well.
Yeah, wonderful.
Anyway, I'm launching sort of Sonic Capital, and basically what we're trying to do is bring impact investing and blockchain, combining those two assets and capabilities together to really make it a profitable industry, right? And so if you look at today, anything in the impact investing is either a sort of, I'm going to give away money, it's a donation, it's very costly It's ineffective in terms of number of middlemen, the process to get approvals associated with it. So how can we track the utilization of our natural resources? How can we then track and then provide a platform for people to trade in that? So once we've tracked it, how do we convert that into a token and then monetize that so people can trade in it? The consumers can see the origination of a specific product in a user-friendly fashion, and the businesses can offset their carbon footprints using those tokens. And if you look at the demand that has grown, you see China announced it's going carbon neutral by 2060. Europe made an announcement. Apple's going by 2030. Amazon's going by 2030. Google wants to be the first. Nike said that their whole supply chain is going to go carbon neutral. There is no way that with the current supply chain and the processes in place to get legitimate carbon offset credits to make sure that all of those companies and countries are going to be compliant with that statement. And number two is, how do we make them accountable for making such a statement? And it's us consumers that have the ability to do that. And I think Gen Z and the millennial generation and the next generations are very keen in making sure that they can enjoy the great oceans that we enjoyed, the blue skies that we can see, as well as the green mountaintops and the snow in the winter, right? And so how can we make sure that they see that as well? And I think blockchain is going to be the answer to making that possible.
I think it's very interesting. I know myself, I am on this mission to help 1 million people start a business of their own. And we tried recently to do an event where we would charge for the event, but all the money that would come from the event would go back to the people who were at that event and might want funding for their business idea.
Yeah.
Slowly you realize that the platforms out there, they all need to take their bit, basically. Nothing's transparent is what I'm saying. And that's what I love about blockchain in general. If you can create a transparency around where the money goes, actually makes it easier to be charitable. Because I find even myself, if I say I'm charging £50 to come on a webinar, but I'm going to give all that money to charity, and then £10 gets taken by the booking engine and £5 gets taken by Zoom, and next thing you know, you're not giving £50, you're giving 25, and people wonder why. And it puts you off as someone that wants to make an impact, because you feel like, oh wow, I'm taking money out of this, it looks like, and it gets harder. So if you can create, as you say, an impact structure with a blockchain backbone, I think that's very exciting, actually.
We're doing exactly that. So we're tokenizing the fund. So we're creating a fund and we're tokenizing it so people can participate. We're providing all the transparency to the funds in terms of how much has gone to management fees, how much has gone to the project, what's the return, how much is being staked, how much is where. And so you have full insights, as well as being able to participate in the funding process. So you, as an investor, will also be able to participate in an investment opportunity from a voting standpoint, as well as a submission standpoint, to get the whole community behind it, and that then the funds will be allocated, for example, to that specific project. So we're really trying to democratize the whole venture investment business.
You've always been ahead of your time, and I absolutely love it. Is it going to be very focused B2B? Is that the main business model?
No, we're going. Well, we've got 4 layers, right? So we've got the infrastructure layer. We've got, so in terms of, in order to be able to track in some of these remote regions, in terms of in markets that aren't fully developed, in areas in agricultural industries, we need connectivity. So infrastructure is super important to provide that connectivity. How do we build that at a decentralized level? You then have data. There's a lot of data moving back and forth. How do I ensure accuracy of that data? So validation. How do I ensure Oracle services? And how do I translate that data into visualization tools that people outside of the crypto and software development sphere can see? You have platforms. You then have the enterprise and consumers, who are at the sort of top, that need the dApps to be able to visualize and interact with those technologies.
Wow, fantastic. Well, we'll put all the links to what you're doing in the broadcast notes. So anyone interested listening, I know a lot of people listen to this broadcast throughout the next 24 hours. So you can click the link down below. It will also be on Spotify, so folks can click the link below if you want to find out more about what Stefan's doing. Stefan, as you know, the format for this show is we have a guest on to tell their story, which you've kindly done. And then we have David Tait actually joining us now. I believe you know him, CEO of Mandarin Matrix. He's going to come on and tell us what he's up to. I'm going to see how we can support him. So, David, welcome.
Simon,
how's it going?
Can you hear me first and foremost?
Yes, we can. Yeah, that's the new greeting, isn't it? It used to be handshakes, but now it's hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Very professional. Exactly. How are you going, David?
Great, and good to catch up. I mean, it always seems far too long. I think last time I caught up with you, Simon, you were still at Fluid, and Stefan, I think. I was trying to recall, I think it was staggering around Llama Island maybe 20 years ago, but I'll have to recall that one. Maybe we can contact each other about when that was in dark history. Yeah. Anyway, so fascinating to hear. My goodness, Stefan, what you've been doing in that Bitcoin space. I mean, terrifies me, but fantastic all the same. I mean, if you're going to try and hold the water back, you ain't going to do it by saying that Bitcoins aren't going to work. I know that for sure.
Why is it terrifying? Just out of curiosity, why? What's terrifying about it?
Because you still have battalions of slightly stupid middle-aged people like myself who don't quite get it. Okay. But we'll get there, don't worry.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
She gets it.
Well, it is interesting. Like, a lot of people are scared of Bitcoin. Yeah. I think they're scared of this decentralization. I mean, in particular, I'm going to say governments. I think governments are particularly scared of it, right? I mean, as a debate question, it's if it makes the US dollar no longer the most required currency, for example, that's a big problem, right?
Well, I was going to say that's one of the great benefits. I don't think that's a problem at all.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it's definitely one of those things that I think governments are scared of. But David, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're up to, and myself and Stefan and the community listening will see how we can help you.
Yeah, well, I mean, very good to have a quick chat, and I definitely come from the far more primitive bricks and mortar background in many ways. I've been publishing out in Asia now for 27 years, which sort of dates me somewhat. And basically in 2014, we were asked as a little publishing group to help schools in Hong Kong with teaching Mandarin. And so schools like German Swiss and schools like the ESF and Kellett and Harrow, there's a community of international schools. And they basically came to us and said, we need some help with introducing our Mandarin program. So we said, sure, we're publishers, we can create material for you. What do you want? And they said, we'd like 6 little readers. So I said, okay, something like this? And they said, yeah, that's just what we want. That's just what we want. One of them. Okay, we'll do 6 of them. They then said, okay, we'll have 72. And they said, okay, we can do that. And they said, we'll now have 320 of them. We went, okay, we're killing a lot of trees here. And so what we then did was we said, well, hang on, what about if we put all of this into an online space? And we began to develop a platform which would help kids learn Mandarin as a second language. And we did it for a couple of reasons. One is we suddenly realized the sheer scale of the market. And there was basically nobody else out there doing it at the time. Well, there was one person, and that was the Chinese government. But for a whole bunch of reasons, they weren't doing a particularly good job of it. So we started the Mandarin Matrix, started from 6 little printed products. And from that little thing I waved you, there's now slightly over 1,800 of them. And we teach Mandarin for kids from the age of 3 up to 18. And we have a platform which is common to teaching any curriculum. And so we can teach up to IB, we can teach GCSE, we can teach up to A-level. And what started in Hong Kong has then spread throughout the United States. And we support dual language immersion programs in Utah, Arizona, and California, Delaware. It's moving into Texas. And not the easiest market at the moment to work in. And then when the COVID problem arose and more kids were being sent home to do their studying, we got an awful lot of telephone calls saying, well, for our Mandarin program, can you help? And we've helped a lot of people. And our first sort of B to G type gig that we picked up was actually working with University College London for the Department for Education in the United Kingdom, because they co-run a program called the Mandarin Excellence Program, which aims to have 5,000 UK kids get to A-level in Mandarin each year. And they're actually doing quite well, probably better than people would imagine. And we now have over 5,000 students online on a daily basis in the UK.
Wow,
Chinese is here to stay. Sorry, Simon.
No, I was going to say it's not a small number, and I think it's one of those languages that a lot of people. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's learned. He seems to be my favorite person to mention today, but he's learned Mandarin, right? I mean, it seems if you want to do business in Asia, you have to learn Mandarin.
Well,
I mean, by the way.
Pardon?
But so Stefan, you've also studied Mandarin, haven't you, Stefan?
Yeah, I studied Mandarin really early on. I went to Beijing to study Mandarin.
Yeah, and I think I saw your HSK4, which is a very high level of Mandarin for someone who's not basically from a Chinese heritage background. But it's a huge market. You know, that there's probably 35 million kids who are going to be learning Mandarin by 2025. Now, some of that data comes from the Chinese government, but it's growing pretty much universally. And it's going to be of most importance, I believe, to kids who are in developing economies rather than necessarily in the West or more developed economies. So if you think about the fact that we're successful at the moment in the United States, that's great. But if you add the population of Indonesia and the Philippines, it's bigger than the United States. And in terms of locality, it's far more important that children in the Philippines or in Indonesia actually get on top of Mandarin, because it's going to be more significant to their economic development for their countries. The same actually applies if you look at Africa now, the amount of inward investment that's come from China. And to give some sort of context, 35 million children sounds like quite a lot. But in China at the moment, the estimate is that there's 415 million people learning some English. And so even if the rest of the world got to 35 million Chinese learners, we're still not going to be, you know, even 10% of the way to what China's managing to do in English. And it is an important language. The language which is difficult to learn, but brings a whole bunch of rewards if you actually manage to get on top of it. And in terms of happier world in the future, and more of us could speak Chinese, I think we'd actually live in a slightly happier planet generally at the moment.
I think language is a good way of understanding culture as well, isn't it? You know, if you don't understand how people put things, you can misunderstand what they're saying.
Yeah, and it's vitally important that we learn other languages. And I think we're all too lazy. And in fact, I would hazard to say that the education system at the moment doesn't put nearly as much importance on languages as it could. I'm not saying that STEM isn't more important. I would actually say it is more important in the modern world that we live in. But if you can talk to the other person, if you can sell to them, even if you're having to do it on a Zoom call, it's vitally important that you can communicate in an appropriate language, even if it's just to do the greetings. It'll still get you part of the way there.
I did read that in China there's more people learning English than the rest of the world combined learning English. You know,
correct.
So 415 million people, and I think therein lies one of the problems in a way, because I feel like I lived in Thailand for a couple of years, and I thought, you know, my first kind of stint overseas, I would learn the language. So I learned to speak Thai, but I would walk up to someone in a supermarket and say, you know, which way to this, and they reply to me in English. You know, yes. So you become lazy almost. You know, it's like Hong Kong's a great example. I can get in a cab and a taxi driver will be speaking pretty much 9 times out of 10 great English, will know exactly what I'm saying. You know, so in a way, it almost makes it redundant to learn Cantonese in this case, right? But I think as the world gets more aware of just how impactful China is going to be on the rest of the world, you know, if China's learning English, the Western society needs to learn Mandarin. It's almost like a prerequisite.
I don't think everyone has to, but some people do. You need a percentage of your population speaking it, I think.
I mean, just coming to another point, right? As languages evolve, and I think, I mean, I have a view that I think 2 languages are going to survive in the world, right? It's going to be Chinese and English, and we might have some remnants of Spanish, and we might have some German trying to hold on, and maybe a little bit of Russian. But I think the 2 dominant languages in the world are going to be those 2, just by general of how many people are speaking it, and laziness, etc. But I think what's going to happen as well is we're going to see, if we're doing Zoom like we're doing now all the time, already today you have earbuds that you can have that hear your technology and translate it. I can communicate to you, so we can actually have real-time translation. How accurate it is, I don't know. Based on some of the Google Translate experiences, it's not always that accurate. But I mean, it could be a way of leveraging technology to enhance communication and drive a future that might make it a happier place because we can understand each other a little more.
Yeah, I totally agree with the fact that tech is a very important part of what happens next. And in fact, many parts of what we're doing in the business now are aligning with how we use technology to do it.
Yeah.
I think you're right about Chinese and English being dominant. I actually think that Chinese in time may actually morph into something different. And that's because machine code doesn't use Chinese characters. And as we have more and more of an integration with AI and machine code, the use of, happy 10,000 characters is not going to be quite as important as it was. And hence you have this huge requirement of keyboard skills, whatever, in China, which involves a QWERTY keyboard rather than just doing predictive text to try to get simplified Chinese characters.
WinStar and stuff like that.
But on the tech side, I mean, a couple of things. One of the things that we're beginning to work on now is the development of basically avatars that can react with children on screen. So that they basically have a more anthropomorphic experience being taught by somebody who looks like a teacher. And it's difficult because we've got to make sure we get the tones sorted out. And it's difficult enough for adults to sort out the tones. But when you've got 5-year-olds, it becomes even more of a challenge. So we do have a very strong team up at the Hong Kong Science Park who are helping us basically looking at coming up with avatars that can support the learning. Doesn't replace Chinese teachers, but one of the things we're trying to do, and I don't think it's a problem you can solve, is there are not going to be enough Mandarin teachers who are willing to teach Mandarin out in the wider world. Because if you can speak 2 languages really well, one of which is Mandarin, you can go and work in a hedge fund. You don't need to become a Chinese teacher. So there's a huge need for tech to kick in and fill this void if Chinese language is important. And I think, if you have views as to how one goes about tackling that whole issue, I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are.
I mean, the reason we do the podcast is, I guess, 2 reasons. One, to let people know interesting things that are going on. So, David, what you're doing is really interesting. And then also, figure out how we can help you in any way. Is the thing right now how to scale? Particularly?
Yeah, we are beginning to scale. But we're doing an A round at the moment. And I spend quite a lot of time talking to VCs that are interested in the Edtech space, which is the cross we have to carry if we're in that entrepreneurial space, much like sometimes working out how to pay your payroll and those other points which Stefan was referring to, which we know all too much about. But that's going fine. Actually, I think I've got sort of 3 promises of term sheets, which is always quite a good place to be. But it doesn't fully scale what we want to do, because if you want to scale something up to help 35 million users, you're talking about a fairly massive tech enterprise that can do that. Even if you get 10% of that, 3.5 million users, and I know people have Instagram accounts and they have 3.5 million followers. It's not quite the same as actually having 3.5 million children who you might actually have online, who you're then monitoring the data, the progress they're making, and you're doing it simultaneously. If you're using a lot of cloud computing to do that, it's not just about 3.5 million followers. So if there are people out there who are in that sort of bigger data or like the idea of what we're talking about, we're all ears. We'll talk to everybody about this at the moment.
So you're positioning yourself as an EdTech business right now, right? So the technology piece, just explain that a little bit. How does it presently work?
Well, at the moment, basically a user would come online. I'm talking about the student. So let's say it's a 10-year-old. They'll come online. The teacher will have set up a bunch of work for them. They can do it in the classroom. They can do it at home. They'll go through literacy exercises, which means they'll do speaking, reading, writing, and comprehension, all within the single little module. The data from that will then be stored at the back end, and they'll be able to monitor their progress. And we align every single part of the platform to the Common European Framework of Languages and the ACTFL can-do statements, which is the American equivalent, so that it's marking the proficiency of the learner step by step, page by page. Because ultimately, parents might want their kid to get an A star at GCSE or a 9, I think it is now, or get a 7 at IB. That's important. We still live within a set of summative tests within education. But what you really want is people to have proficiency. You want them to be able to communicate in language.
Yeah, totally.
And if we're building a platform, we might as well build it and make sure we're covering off proficiency as well, because that's important. Once you've got your 12 O levels, brilliant. Obviously, GCSE is age. That's great. But what you really want to be able to do is, when you're a 22-year-old, be able to actually speak in Mandarin. And I think we can actually cover some of that with what we've got already. But what we don't have is the full teaching solution. So where we bring tech in is in 2 places. One is to build avatars and bots, which will be more responsive, so that it's a stronger user experience. And the second part is actually a proficiency assessment. So if we can collect in more data, we can basically begin to better predict the standard the learner has got to, and then better tailor the next steps they have to go through in their learning process. So that's where tech marries into what we've got. We have 60,000 kids on the platform right now, so it's not like we're not up and running and we're profitable. But scaling from 60 to 35 million is quite a big jump.
I'm sure you've been asked this question many times. Out of your team, right? How big is your team? And of that percentage, how many is in tech? How many developers do you have on your team overall as a percentage of your overall staff?
Okay, the short answer is not enough. But we basically have a team of 17 here in Hong Kong. We've got 4 in the States and 3 in the UK. And of the 17, 3 are in the development of the tech. However, we're actually a content play. Because remember, we've created 18,000 different components which actually create all the curriculum. And so whilst that isn't tech, that's part of the creation of the asset in some ways. And then we have a collaborative group up in the Science Park, and there's 14 of them who are actually coders and AI developers. So, but I can't afford 14 of my own, so I just have to borrow other people's.
And from a fundraising perspective, I mean, you're loading on more tech, right? So you're looking for more data insights. You're adding avatar capabilities to it.
Yeah.
That's going to put more stress on the networking capability, because that avatar needs to work across the 60,000 students, right? So I think, and Hong Kong's not always, it's not always the easiest place to find good developers to help develop and build the solution you need. Understand the networking requirements. You need data centers, you need servers, so it's definitely.
It's one of these sort of accidental huge problems I've run into, which is that we're doing something good. I have no doubt about that.
Definitely.
And it sounds quite simple, teach a bunch of children Chinese, but talk about something which has layer and layer of complexity to it. I mean, just consider the fact that there are 2 lexicons of Chinese characters. You've got the simplified characters and the traditional characters. And so in Hong Kong and Taiwan, they won't use traditional characters. Some people in the US want traditional. The majority of the world want simplified, but it means every single part of product is doubled up to cover both of those. Again, the next part we come across is that children don't learn languages really from anything other than their mother tongue. So there's not much point in us just having it available in English. And so all the navigation and the support now we have in French and Spanish, and we just introduced Japanese and Arabic, and we're moving towards Bahasa, Thai next. We can do that relatively easily. But what Stefan is saying about the complexity of the whole thing, it gets bigger and bigger. Because every time you add on another language, you're scaling up database quite dramatically.
So
at the moment,
Series B now.
Sorry?
We're just starting a Series B tomorrow.
So maybe if anybody here wants to skip my A, I've got that done. Come talk to me about Series B, because we're going to need it, guys. We need it. But it's very exciting.
Totally.
And I think it is a comment worth making. If anyone's listening to this and wants to comment on it, I think in Edtech, we actually have a different responsibility in some ways as entrepreneurs or even the investors, because if you start companies and they don't work out, you can shut them down again. No one gets hurt. No one gets damaged on the way through. When you've got 60,000 little people who are getting up every day or 3 times a week to do their Chinese, and suddenly you pull the plug on them because you failed as a business, you have a moral responsibility to make sure you're going to build this thing and keep it stable and keep these children on the right track to their learning outcomes. Certainly in something like we're doing, when there isn't a huge number of options available. So maybe people in EdTech have to have a slightly different spin on it, because you do have to be responsible to market a slightly different way beyond just the ROI, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I personally always come at businesses from, I mean, that's why I love having someone like Stefan on, because his technical ability is mind-blowing. So I think, David, you two should have a coffee, as you're both in Hong Kong. Well, it's virtual these days, I'm sure, but you two should definitely catch up again. 20 years is too long. But when I listen to you, I always actually go to the other side of it, which is the client side. You've got 60,000 people using your service. That is an incredible number. You always say in business, you only need 3 customers to really build a business, because from then onwards, the referral can be mind blowing. And so, one of the problems you've got, I guess, with your business is the 3 to 18-year-old bracket. They age out of it in theory, right? But they could be your teachers, by the way. You could be training your own workforce, or certainly a workforce that could support in some way complementary to what you're doing. Second is the referrals that network could bring you just kind of blow my mind. I don't think 35 billion is so crazy, actually. Like you said, when you look at the number of people learning English, plus you add it to some sort of I want to call it butterfly effect that you could have from that existing 60,000.
Yeah, I think it's possible, or I wouldn't be doing it. It isn't easy though, and it is layer upon layer of complexity, whether it's linguistic or it's technological or it's your hosting. It's even political at the moment. And I have a very firm view that when you mix education and politics, all you get is more politics. So, we very much try and work away from that. And we're basically agnostic about the whole thing. But you have a situation in the United States and in Europe, a lot of the Confucius Institutes, which are the Chinese government's culture and language academies, have been shut down for political reasons, because there's a concern about interference in universities and in higher education. Well, that's cascaded down. So the programs they were running in schools have now basically all been backtracked. Now, there's a silver lining, which is that we are apolitical and we can fill that void a little bit. But we still want to make sure that what we are teaching is appropriate to whichever market we're in. And you've got to be a little bit sensitive to that. But even to the point of the artwork, which we're now looking at for the Middle East, we actually have to change it a little bit, because you have cultural sensitivities of the way children approach different things in different areas. Now, that's common to all educational publishing. But we're just finding that we've got this sort of snowballing, what good way, sort of product potential, which we're quite excited about.
Well, it's perfect. I mean, yeah, it's like you're in the storm, you're sailing, you got a great ship, and then there seems to be good demand for it. And the sails are up, the wind's blowing, and you're moving. It's definitely rough sailing, but that's, when the wind's there, it's going to have a couple of waves, which is great.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, I guess. That's always the saying, isn't it? If it was easy,
and a couple of waves is fine, but you're just got to make sure that you don't hit too big a one or broach. And I think it's always wise to be humble enough to realize that what you're doing has got to be sort of framed within what is realistic and whatever time frame you're looking at. But yeah, that's where you're not wrong to say that if we've got an A round coming, we should already be looking at a B round, because we know that we will need that if we really want to scale up. And we'd also need to be partnering with people who are bigger than ourselves. We'd have to be talking to the big EdTech groups who are already moving around the world and have the bandwidth to add things onto them. And I think that will be an interesting process as well.
I can't help but think, getting a partner, and I'll be careful how I say this, but because I know sometimes these companies are seen as evil, but Google Ventures would be a good investor in you, because they can provide a lot of the cloud and tech support I think that you need on this. I think what you've got is a proof of concept right now. You got a very big MVP. You proved demand. You've got like you say the backbone criteria for providing. I'm going to call it a nuanced education opportunity to people. But you probably need. The investors you get now are crucial. Money is one thing, but I actually think with what you're doing, I'm assuming the parents of these kids are paying, so money solves all problems. And I think what you really need is a technical investor. And I don't. Google Ventures might not be the best one, but Amazon have a venture arm now, for example. I'm sure Stefan's got a few things to add on this, but getting someone that knows it. I mean, Stefan's actually had a business that was Exicon that was actually building tech for businesses like you, so he'd be an ideal investor. I don't know if he's investing right now, but having the right investors right now are key, I think, to your growth. And I think part of it as well. If I was investing in you, I'd been thinking about how I could get enough income coming in that I don't rely on a Series B. Because right now it is tough raising money, and if you're waiting for that money, so can those 60,000 kids all go on TikTok and promote you, and get and get 1 million kids using you by the end of next week? And you laugh. I've been on TikTok 3 months. I've just hit 60,000 followers. I mean, it's insane, that platform, absolutely. And I'm a 40-year-old boring businessman. I'm not an interesting 17-year-old who can speak multiple languages. So.
We're employing 17-year-olds to help us.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got an amazing base there. That if you can get those 60,000 to all refer 3 people and then they pay, you don't need a Series B. What you need is a technical partner, definitely.
Yeah, I think you might be right, but I think that again, there's complexity when you're dealing with children, right? Children don't have the ability to do a referral the way an adult does. The security we have to run on the accounts because they're in a classroom environment is totally different from what you can do with TikTok just as a private citizen. So we have to be grown up to that. I
don't know what the rules are, but I can only tell you that on my own TikTok, a 14-year-old did a duet, which is one of the functions on TikTok, with me. And because he did that, I got 5,000 more followers. And of course, I'm sure technically I'm not employing him to promote me or refer me, but the way the world is today, I think if someone likes your service and you can encourage them to tell other people, because of course, if their colleagues or siblings, for example, learn language, it's only going to be a good thing for them, right? So that but I don't know what the rules are legally on that, but not necessarily paying them as such, but
there are rules, and there are different rules in every single country as well. So we just have to be very careful when it involves you working with children in a data environment.
If you enjoy my service, if you've enjoyed learning Mandarin through this service, please go tell your friends online about it. I mean, surely that's nothing wrong with that.
You'd be amazed at what you can't do. But no, I mean, the whole point of getting the message out and having a bit of social media chatter, having an ongoing discourse is vitally important. Again, there's complexity. So all the teachers who we deal with communicate with each other using WeChat, and it's only in Chinese channels because Chinese teachers speak to each other in Chinese. When it comes to parents, they don't speak Chinese, and so you've got to open up to in other channels, whether it's Facebook or it's Instagram or whatever. So it's an ongoing issue which we have to keep reaching out. And I think the other thing is that whilst we do have kids who are having licenses paid for by school districts or by international schools or by their parents, we also want to maintain the equity and education component. And so whilst you might be paying $70 a year in the US for this, if we were to take it to the Philippines, we'd be looking at how we could deploy it at 5 to 10 US per child, because you want to see if you can get this into more and more children and go for numbers rather than just for dollars. And that's where you have a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between the straight investment and what you're trying to achieve, which is the whole issue of can you get this language being learned by enough children that it'll make a difference.
What do you want to achieve?
I beg pardon?
What do you want to achieve?
Oh, I want 35 million kids, and ultimately I want their economies to be so successful they pay full price. But in the way through,
You want 35 million kids using your service, paying full price.
do you know, it isn't something that I consider in that way. I think what we would like to do is have it deployed widely, so lots of children are learning Chinese. Because even if you're giving them it for free at certain points in the cycle, if they become loyal users of the Mandarin Matrix, we'll keep them, because it takes a long time to learn Chinese. So if you have a child here in the international system, for instance, starting as a 5-year-old, you'll still have them on the system when they're 16. And if you have someone who drifts away from the language because they didn't do too well at it and they bunked out when they were 12 or 13, which happens a lot, we're now beginning to look at putting in contextual courses so that you can give them a refresher so that they can learn Mandarin for the hospitality industry or Mandarin for border control. And we can take our product in terms of the existing structure and expand it an awful lot. And that's where you'll ultimately keep on catching more and more numbers. And you'll be able to monetize probably better sometimes in the older age groups, where people as adults will pay more for a particular skill being presented to them than maybe you necessarily can with children all the time.
I mean, there's a whole discussion around, how to scale a business, and there's just so many different ways to do it. I think, the free meal model is interesting. Okay, so where you especially with new markets like the Philippines, where right now you've got it all there, you've got the system running. I don't know how much difference it makes if suddenly you've got 100,000 people in the Philippines using it. I don't know what strain that puts on you, but if you can give it to that market free, let that market get used to it, let that market appreciate it. And as the market develops and as it becomes something that people realize is crucial, then you can start charging for it. And, I always think about how I can buy time, right? Because if you wait a year or two and then you launch it and you do it at $5 because now you can, you've lost 2 or 3 years of being in that market. And, I guess if you can buy time by, again, I don't know enough about the business. This is just a quick chat, so we can get into it more maybe offline. But I do feel like there's an opportunity to do the free meal. I'm sure you thought of it. The other side is, as I say, brands like Google Ventures, they do a lot of stuff with kids. I mean, I just invested in a business called Peas to Pod, and they're a subscription box business. They target the 3 to 8-year-olds, and they're basically doing they're doing cultural boxes, which is really interesting, because I think Chinese New Year globally now is actually something that's talked about and almost celebrated as a way of culturally understanding what's going on. If you got tied into that in Germany, in America, during that time, here's Chinese New Year, this is what that culture is all about. By the way, click here and learn the language. That would be very powerful, I think. And then at that moment, people are very open to understanding why language and culture and all that things is something that youngsters should know about. Come March, they're starting to think, about other things. But, January, February time, that cultural discussion around Chinese New Year is quite prevalent in Europe and America. Anyway, just throwing things out there, but I'd love to, what do you think of that?
No, I think that's great, Simon. I mean, on the freemium side, not because we were trying to be generous, but when the COVID problem hit, there were a bunch of schools in Hong Kong which weren't using the platform. We just gave it to them for free.
Brilliant.
And I think we've converted about 70 of them now, because of course they all expect to be back in school by now, but they're not. And so they've still got the same problem. And they understood that, 3 or 4 months for free was fine, but not that expensive, so why not subscribe? So I think we're canny enough to be able to put the goodwill out there. There is a cost though for running big freemium type projects, so you've just got to make sure that unit cost is something that you're monitoring quite carefully. But I take your enthusiasm and your point, which is let's light the fire about this thing and let's let it soar up into the sky and go for it. So maybe we should take that bit offline.
Yeah, definitely, because I think the other element that a lot of people overlook, because there's many ways to make money. It's from the user, which is fine. And that's a good model, I think. It's underrated, but free meal works. But I still think charging someone for a service, nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, you've got the investment side, which helps fund maybe the free meal model. But I also think there's an angle on this around sponsors. I mean, I'm just talking about the business I've invested in right now, Peas to Pod. there's a good cross-marketing opportunity there. You know, they would, I mean, reaching your 60,000, they're doing a very different thing to you. They're a nature-led education program. They're not language-led. They're about, you know, how to grow a pumpkin, for example, and what, you know, then decorating that pumpkin around Halloween, for example, and then understanding what Halloween's all about, and so on. And I do think there's people out there, millions of users, millions of subscription users, that there could be a really interesting cross-marketing, cross-sponsorship, cross-partnership opportunity there. And I don't know if you're on that, but I would. I mean, I love sales, so, you know, branding and sales and that stuff. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
I think underneath it all, I'm a sales guy as well. And yeah, I mean, some of the things I've thought about, for instance, you know, working on the big insurance groups, because they have distribution, they have parents of kids, they have ways that they want to show value to their customer, and we could cross-brand that sort of way. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there which are quite exciting. I also think that it's one of these things where you've got to make sure you're keeping very much a focus, though, and not trying to do everything all at once. And you know, it is a little bit more challenging at the moment running a business, because, you know, I haven't seen my US or my European team since Christmas. You don't need to, but it helps. And I think having people in a state of isolation has made it a little bit challenging. But equally, it's meant that the people over there have recruited their own teams who I haven't even met yet. So it's certainly a way of delegating the stuff out, just because you can't go and get over involved with it yourself. And I think, Stefan, something you know, which I have toyed around with, which sort of ties it back a little bit to some of the stuff you're doing. I think that it'd be fantastic going forward to have people owning their own little piece of blockchain which has their language proficiency on it, because language proficiency is something which changes over time. And if you could actually give people a little language passport, rather than people saying that I can speak French or German or Spanish or Chinese in this case, if they could actually have their own identity in terms of linguistic ability, and you could store it in the right sort of place, I think that's quite a nice add-on in terms of a premium product. Because of course, you can teach people the language, but as you say yourself, there's lots of different monetizing. You can sell a subscription, you can sell add-on services like one-on-one tutoring, you could sell on travel. But if you could sell on new ways of having proficiency, new ways of actually acknowledging what people's quantitative and qualitative language ability is, their proficiency, I think that'd be incredibly powerful. And I think that employers, for instance, would look to that in the future as being a very strong badge that proves someone who was coming into the team actually had the language ability. But maybe we should take that one offline and just see if it's even feasible. Okay.
Stefan, last word to you. We must come to the end of the broadcast. We've taken up way too much of everyone's time, but I thank both of you for coming on. But Stefan, last few words before we close.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think there's boundless opportunities, right? I think this COVID has really pushed a lot of people into digital. I mean, transformation officers, you know, they've been working around and haven't really achieved much. COVID has been the transformation office to get people onto digital. I mean, it's been unfortunate for a lot of other people, very sadly, but that's what it's taken to really drive a lot of activity into a digital world, which has benefited a lot of the technical, you know, sort of digerati, if you will, and entrepreneurs like yourselves. And I'm a growth guy, right? I mean, I love sales as well, but I love growth. I just, how can we run faster, move faster, bring more users on, right? And I think that is my advice, because the more users you have, the more data you acquire. The more data you acquire, the better you can learn of what your users want, and let the data tell you what you need to build. And go to where the users are coming from fastest, and then grow from there. That's sort of my sort of 2 cents. And yeah, I don't know, you know, I mean, I don't know where Bitcoin or blockchain fits into all of this, other than maybe paying for the services in crypto. That would be awesome. And you'd get a lot of crypto community paying for that service, I can tell you that. Other than that, you know, thank you for having me on here and investing your time for putting this together.
Sure, it's wonderful to have you both here. You're getting a lot of love online, and this will be up online now well, forever actually, so people will be able to hear your story and hear what you're both up to. But I know that both of you are very busy, successful people. I appreciate you taking the time to share your story, and hopefully the community can also give back and support you guys by liking your links. I'll put in all the broadcast notes below, and sharing a like or two on your social media. But yeah, lots of love for you guys today for sharing your story and what you're doing. So thank you both very much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
There we go, guys. That's our broadcast for today. I hope you found it useful. If you found what Stefan had to say and what David had to say useful, insightful, I'd really appreciate it if you went to their links below, gave them a thumbs up on their social media, dropped them a line, gave them a comment. If in any way you can help them with what they're doing, or you think in any way they can help you, then please feel free to reach out. Again, I'll put the links to both my guests and their social media handles, etc., in the comments below. For myself, I hope you found it useful. I hope if you're thinking of starting a business, you've got some insights from Stefan, who I think is a futurist. He's a tech entrepreneur, of course, but at the end of the day, he's given some insights, I think, into the future there. So hopefully that's given you some ideas on what businesses you could be starting. And I hope that David's story will inspire you a bit. I'm inspired by David. I think no business is easy. He's building a business that certainly isn't easy. He's doing an amazing job, if you ask me, having 60,000 users, and his purpose is very strong, helping people learn a language, which I think adds so much depth to your personal character later in life. You understand culture through language. It's just an amazing thing to learn. I've learned a few languages in my life, and I'm absolutely honored that I know those languages, because I feel like I know the culture just a little bit more. So thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to contribute with your comments. I've seen them, Lena, Grace, Dirk, Talia, I've seen them all. I was so engrossed in the conversation today that I didn't interact with you as much as I normally did, but thank you so much for taking the time to make comments. Thank you for sharing this broadcast. Thank you for giving comments and giving us likes. That makes the algorithm like us more, so that more people can hear Stefan's story and David's story. So thank you for doing that. We'll be back next Wednesday live again with two entrepreneurs giving insights to you, hopefully sharing their story. So look forward to having you back then. We'll be live again tomorrow, sharing, as I mentioned, we put together 18 sales tips to help you be a more efficient salesperson. I think everybody starting a business or everyone's existing business can do better in sales. So I hope you find that video useful. We'll drop that in tomorrow. We'll see you again on Thursday next week for the Good Luck Club podcast. And don't forget, Bernard Moon, one of the most active early stage investors based in Silicon Valley. You can catch his podcast and insights, what his firm's looking to invest in and why, what he thinks about businesses, how they should grow, what he thinks we should be getting involved in sector-wise. That's all available right now on goodluckpod.com. You can, of course, comment, share, let us know if there's anything we can do to help you, and we will endeavor to do it. Thanks for listening today. We feel exceedingly lucky that you take the time to listen to our broadcast. See you later, guys.